about you. I mean, I love the structure of your new book. It's very easy to follow.
Oh, good.
I have to say, I really enjoyed listening to you reading it.
Oh,
So I
well,
don't know if
that's
that.
good. That was I've read a bunch of my books, and it's always a fun challenge. But this one, the last two, I did this with the producer. We produced it ourselves, and in my studio, and yeah, I think I read it. And I mean, we budgeted 4 days, and I think I read it. And it's 5 hours long, and I think it only took 9 hours of recording, which was a
Wow.
record. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
Okay.
I was
Okay.
went really well.
So can I just start by asking a
Yeah.
very simple question? I
Sure.
mean, what was the motivation behind the book? And I'll just flash up there's the
There it is.
name of the
Okay.
book.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, that's nice. The motivation was, well, I should say that actually the book was suggested by my British publisher
Was
as a
it?
possibility in a different context, but they wanted sort of unanswered questions about the universe, and they had the idea of like 25 unanswered questions, and I began to think about it,
Hmm.
and I just thought I really liked it because I thought it would be a nice complement to the books my sort of oeuvre of science books. The Universe of Nothing talked about something at the forefront of cosmology. The greatest story we're told so far. After that, about our fundamental understanding of sort of the smallest scale structures in the world,
Hmm.
and I thought the idea of having done that, talking about more generally the open questions in science would be a great hook. Partly because that's what motivated me as a young person. First realizing, in particular, as I said in the end of the book, first realizing that physics hadn't all been done and
Yeah.
there was something left to do, was really an awakening for me. Hey, maybe this is an invitation. Maybe one day I can do something
Yes.
like that, and I wanted to return the favor. And it
Hmm.
was only after thinking about it as well when as with all my books, I didn't quite know what the structure would be, but um, and it evolves. And finally, I decided that these 5 sections would do it, which encompass space, time, space, matter, life, and consciousness, would really hit the major open questions in science. But the interesting thing is, they're the same questions that people have who aren't scientists.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting that the forefront of science is addressing questions that are the same ones everyone has, whether they're a scientist or not. And I
Yes.
thought it'd be a nice hook because of that, an opportunity for me to take people up to. Obviously, if I'm talking about the mysteries, I have to take people up to the edge. As
Yes.
that's why the American version is called the edge of science, edge of knowledge. It gives me an opportunity to bring people up to date with where we're at, and also, I in 1930, actually, someone, uh, Sir James Jeans, who was actually really influential for me. I read a book by him called Physics and Philosophy when I was in high school, which really confirmed my interest in physics. He
Hmm.
wrote a book called, I think, The Mysterious Universe, which was a big hit in England. And my British publisher asked me to look at that, and it was just nice because it's now very quaint.
Yes.
And I love the idea of writing a book which 100 or almost 100 years from now, or maybe 50 years from now, will seem quaint. I certainly hope it seems quaint, even
Yes.
25 years from now.
That'd be nice. The chapter on there was a really I mean you made me giggle because the chapter on life when I was studying biology in Edinburgh, obviously life is the one of the key challenges to any young biologist is trying to understand life. And I swear to you, we used to sit in Edinburgh pubs and student unions arguing about whether a crystal was alive or all
Yeah.
these and fire that I know you talk about in the book. So I was particularly drawn to that, but that's my bias. I mean, what one of the 5 do you think is the most interesting to you? Or
Uh, I hate
I know
those kind
that's
of
hard.
questions
It's
because
picking one of your
only
children.
people always ask me what's the most X,
Yeah,
whatever it is, and I tend just not to think hierarchically about things. They're
yeah,
all interesting to me as I think about which my books is my favorite. Well, it's often the one I'm writing, but
yes,
but they're all interesting, and I have a hard time um, putting them in order.
okay,
Each of them is fascinating to me in different contexts. Obviously, the first 3 are closely related to my own research discipline in physics, but I've been fascinated with issues related to the origin of life and the existence of life in the universe, which actually I've written about even in the context of physics. And so, and I've run meetings on the origin of life and that subject. What I find so fascinating about that is I actually think that's the one area where it's quite likely in the next decade or two, a lot of those questions will be resolved. Of all the major issues that I talk about and uncertainties, I think origins of life and the existence of life elsewhere in the universe are areas where, because of new tools and because that's what drives science, is new empirical tools, will be resolved. So I found that incredibly exciting. Consciousness is interesting because it's an area I've kind of, although I've run some meetings on AI, I've kind of avoided it because I've been very skeptical. As I think I said in the book, a good friend of mine, maybe I didn't, but a good friend of mine, she reads every book on consciousness, and every week she used to tell me about a new book on consciousness and how it was revolutionizing everything. And that's when the statement that someone else had told me, which was, you can tell how much is known about a subject by how many books are written about it. The more books, the less is known. Anyway, it was a real good chance for me to motivate me to study something I wouldn't have followed up on. I have friends who were neuroscientists, and I've talked to them before, and some very eminent neuroscientists and philosophers of science, and from people from Noam Chomsky to Steve Pinker and others, and in that area, and then others I've interviewed for my podcast as well. So when I write a book, it's a good chance for me to do something I wouldn't have the discipline to do otherwise. And I try in every book I write to do some new things, because otherwise you tend to write the same book over and over again. And this is my 12th book. And I must say, the other reason I should have answered your other question as well is that I thought this would be a good sort of ultimate science book. It would take me, what could I do after this? Because I'm thinking that this may be my last science book. And so I thought this would be a good way to sort of bow out. We'll see. But I think this is sort of the ultimate book in my mind.
So now that the people that are listening to this in the UK are on the floor, what will the next book be then? What are you thinking about?
Well,
is that a secret? Is that a secret?
Well, I am going to. I'm not sure if it'll be my next book. I thought it would be, but I'm not sure now. I've been preparing for 50 years. Believe it or not, it's totally different. It's I took a year off 50 years ago to do research on Canadian history. On an episode in the 1930s in the Communist Party in Canada, and I got access to archival material that was restricted. And I have thousands. I amassed after a year of several thousand pages, documents and notes, and I put it aside because I had other things to do. And I promised myself I would write that book. And now that I moved back to Canada, and I've finally unpacked all my Canadian history books, I thought I would devote time. So it may be this book on the social history of Canada in the Depression era, and so totally different. And it'll be for a late history teacher of mine who died, and I promised him he was the one who motivated me to first do it. And as I said, I took a year off and had an amazing experience at the archives again, and discovered some things that will actually, I think, cause some quite newsworthy things when people discover what happened at that time.
Okay.
So that's one. The other actually is even stranger. It's a novel. So we will see. I could change my mind, and some people have suggested other things, but so a lot of people have asked for some kind of autobiography or something. I find that tedious, except I've been fortunate enough to know a lot of remarkable people in both in science and outside of science. And I made a list yesterday when I was thinking about it. I guess there are 40 Nobel laureates, but then besides that, I mean, in other areas. And so it might be nice to talk about my experiences with my very fortunate opportunity to span science and in some sense other aspects of culture. But we'll see what strikes my fancy. And but I just think maybe it's harder to get attention for my science books now. And I thought, well, maybe, I've had a whole bunch of bestsellers, but maybe now it's best time to move on to something else.
Yeah, understood. I think the natural resistance to autobiography and memoir is interesting. But I mean, I guess, well, your colleague Richard Dawkins, when he wrote his substantial, they were terrific because he went into, as his mind does, he very detailed at the beginning of how he got into being a scientist. And And there's one thing that came up, and I didn't plan to ask you about this, but you've kind of mentioned it, and it's very much in line with some of the thinking I've had. I became obsessive about science because of a mentor. It was a professor of pathology called Professor Dougal Gardner, who died at 96 just a couple of years ago. And I wonder if do you think there's enough of those types out there today to inspire young people to go into the scientific disciplines?
Well, I don't know if there are enough. It's one of the reasons I write my books, right? And I've been pleased. I'm old enough.
Yeah.
We talked about the physics of Star Trek, which came out sort of 30 years ago or
Yes.
more. I'm now old enough, and I really realize how old I am when I have people write me and say, "I read your book as a child, and now I'm a scientist." And
Yeah.
you know, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be. But I think I've talked to a number of people where teachers have had no impact, but I think I admire so much teachers, especially at the middle school and high school level, and even elementary school, because I know they had an impact on encouraging me.
Yes.
I mean, not all of them; some of them were awful, but I think it's nice to talk about those experiences. One of the reasons why in my Origins podcast, I often talk to my scientist colleagues about their origins, what got them into science, and everyone I talk to about it, what inspired them to do what they're doing, and there were the often formative experiences early on that are really important, and people should recognize. I think it's nice for people to realize these things happen and to appreciate the people who do that. So anyway, that would be I think if I did such a thing, part of the purpose would be that to explain my own experience and what got me into science. It just seems so solipsistic to write an autobiography. But the other one is just because I've been so fortunate to get to know a lot of people that people I'm sure are fascinated about, and that span a remarkable variety of areas of human intellectual activity, and that may be interesting. I was going to wait till they're all gone, but maybe I won't be around. So I don't know.
No, you don't want to do that. Did your Origins? I mean, I love the Origins podcast for a number of reasons. One, that it's not short.
Yeah. It's
I
sometimes
love
very
that.
long.
Yeah. But I also love the fact that you have such a broad breadth of characters on there.
I'm lucky that I'm really lucky when I look at the people who've agreed to do it and the people I know. Yeah, and the length is, I think, important. Some people are daunted by it, but I think I try and do a deep dive and I try and do my homework.
Yes.
I often find, in fact, 80% of the time, I find that I have 20 pages of notes and we've gone through 3.
Yeah.
But by the time a 3-hour podcast is done, so it's, anyway.
But that's the way it should be. We should be asking questions, shouldn't we?
Yeah, although I have to say that people don't realize in my podcast that it's a dialogue. It's not an interview.
Yeah.
These are people I've known, and especially the scientists, and we have dialogue, and so it's not all questions. It's me talking about in response, and so some people don't like that, and that's fine. But it is what it is.
I especially enjoyed the recent one with the poetry slant.
With Douglas Murray.
And I thought there was a little look under the bonnet, as they would say in the UK, of different aspect of you, which was really nice, actually.
Good. Well,
excellent.
I probably made myself appear too literate, more literate than I actually am. but it was fun to do that because it was also a different side of Douglas Murray. We were able to talk about the kind of substantive issues that people might have expected. And by the way, some people hated it because they don't like Douglas Murray. And the great thing about having such a podcast, and I've done it with a few people who may be in one way or another on a different end of the political spectrum, is that's what it's all about, is having a conversation. But some people are they never want to talk to anyone outside their echo chamber. And it's sad. It's sad. It's one of the big problems in our modern society, I think.
Just today, my second son, he's 13 years old, and he went into school today, and we don't need to talk about the subject, but he had an opinion about something, and he was told by a tearful respondent that he had no right to say that, and he was wrong and should not say it ever again. That's the sort of thing that's happening more and more, and it worries me deeply. I mean, it really does. And he doesn't know how to deal with it. I mean, I don't think most adults know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it happens to me. I have a daughter and a stepdaughter much younger, and it's amazing to see how Well, just to see what's going, how people respond and say, well, you really shouldn't bring that up or talk
Yeah.
about it or something. And it's like, whoa,
Yes.
and it's like, anything that should be game to ask
Of
questions about and talk
course.
about. Yeah,
Of
it's
course. Of
really,
course.
yeah.
That's why, I mean, again, with Douglas, I mean, I politically, I'm not aligned with Douglas, but his writing's so bloody good and
He's
clear
such a
that,
good writer and
yeah,
so clear. And there's some things where I completely, I mean, when it
yeah,
involves cancel culture and nonsense,
yeah,
culture war nonsense, that's
yeah,
how we met first.
yeah,
And
really.
yeah, and I understand people. We didn't talk about climate change. We could have, but I understand he has nutty ideas about, or at least
Yeah, he
I
does.
would say nutty ideas about climate change.
Yeah.
But I've done that with. I had a long two podcasts, one of my show and one of his show with Jordan Peterson,
Yeah,
with whom I agree on certain things and other things I just think what.
yeah,
Anyway,
exactly the
so
same for
yeah,
me. Yeah.
but that's at the last chapter to get back to my book.
Mm.
Although I'm happy to, I'm not trying to sell books, so it doesn't matter. Which then later on turned into an op-ed piece. I talked about the importance of something I began at the beginning of the book, saying I don't know,
Yeah,
which is so important. It's so
so
essential to
important.
science.
Yeah,
But in the end of the book, I point out how it's really essential in all of human activity, and it's really, I think, the biggest antidote to the culture wars is people being willing to say I don't know,
absolutely.
rather than yes, there is systemic racism in academia. Well, okay, how do you know that? Or
Yeah,
yes, there are more than two sexes. Why? Well, I mean, at least being willing to have that conversation instead of being dogmatic about it and
yes,
being potentially changing your mind.
yes,
And so I think the fact that science is built on that dialectic, that the fact
yeah,
that it really is built on challenging ideas and being
yeah.
willing to discuss them in an open debate and ultimately change your mind, which is
Hmm.
what science is all about,
Yeah.
is a wonderful tool that would be so much that would really help the rest of society.
And this is
Toward the end
where,
of the book,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And this is where, I mean, I'm a big, when I was studying, I was a huge influenced by E.O. Wilson's work.
Yeah.
And he used to talk about, the word consilience, where, you bring different
Uh-huh.
paths together. And I often speak about this to people in the context of business, Lawrence, because I say to them, there's almost like, if someone is certain, that's a negative for me. You're allowed to be certain between the ages of 15 and 21,
Yeah.
because they always are. But then you should be asking questions. But even that statement gets, in my experience, people just find it very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oh, I changed my mind on that. Oh, that's terrible. You've made a U-turn. How dare you? And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's peculiar. So if it really focusing again on the book then, because there's these 5 really interesting chapters. Of those, and again, I think it's maybe similar to earlier, but if you're thinking about out with the scientific community, what would you encourage people to just dip their toe in these 5 areas, or these 5 domains? If like, it's a huge area. You've said,
Yeah, they are huge areas, and you
yeah,
can't really cover all of them
no,
in detail. But I mean, I think. Oh, sorry, I have to say my daughter just texted me something, and
right.
uh, sorry, I always take texts from my daughter.
That's a dad's job.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but she's in Disney World, which is where she used
Oh,
to love to go when she was a kid, and so she's back,
lovely.
and she had to tell me. But anyway, I think to reflect the good thing about I also try in my books, I should say, to not be sequential in the sense that if you get lost here, the rest of the book is gone. And so each of those, there is some continuity and spillover, and I try and show that continuity
Hmm.
in the book. But each of them are somewhat separate sections. So each of them relates to questions that people may relate to. And I think time is, the reason I started with
Brilliant.
time and in some sense ended with consciousness is not just that I was moving up. And ultimately, I think consciousness is frankly the most complex problem of all, in spite of how, what quantum gravity may sound like it's complicated. I often used to say on stage, and people would think I was joking, that I'm a physicist because it's easy. But
Yes.
it is compared to, neuroscience in many ways
Yeah.
because you can do more experiments. But time and consciousness are the most personal aspects of our experience of the world.
Hmm.
And so I like that arc of starting with time because there's nothing more personal than time. And the notion that, time is subjective is so amazing. And then of course everyone has questions about, well, how did the universe begin? Was there time before the
Yeah.
universe? But more interestingly, I think people are interested in time travel and whether we can go back and in particular because modern science has invited that interest, because the minute you have general relativity, space and time are on exactly the same footing. They're tied together,
linked,
and one person's space is another person's time. Time, both of them depend on the observer and their relative states of motion and within a gravitational field. And immediately that question arises: well, if you can do a circle in space, why can you not do a circle in time?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating question, and which we still don't know the answer to as I try and describe it. And of course, the future universe. So time, I think, is accessible, even though some of the concepts are mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
It also allowed me to give some interesting history that I love to give history, as I mentioned in my book. I like history in general.
Absolutely.
And there's some history of science in there that's fun about related to black holes.
Mm-hmm.
The matter section, I mean, space, the existence of other universes, multiverses, allowed me to not just talk about how amazing it is, how our picture of the universe on the larger scales has changed, but how we might turn metaphysics into physics, which I think is kind of neat. It's not just all pure speculation, and it also allows me to correct a bunch of misunderstandings about the role and nature of a multiverse, and then matter. What I've always wanted to do is write a little bit more about quantum mechanics, because it's so misunderstood, and abused, even I think by science writers, by scientists. And so I was able to regurgitate an argument from a mentor, if you wish, a friend, but who was certainly, when I was at Harvard, the most intelligent of the smartest of my colleagues, and that was saying a lot, because 3 of them had won actually 7 of them had won the Nobel Prize, but Sidney hadn't. Although he could have if he put his name on the paper with one of his students who later won the Nobel Prize. But Sidney Coleman gave a great talk called Quantum Mechanics in Your Face. It really presents the challenges. And anyway, so it gave me a chance to do that.
Yeah.
And then life, as I say, I think people, well, obviously with the Hubble space, with the James Webb Space Telescope and what's going on, I mean, it's every day people are looking at habitable planets, but or signal searching for signs in an atmosphere of biosignatures. And it's also a field that's evolving so fast, especially because there's also another aspect of total misunderstanding, which, as a person with a biological background, you probably appreciate. But with Darwin and with evolution, it resolved this problem on the Earth. The Earth looked like it was specially designed for life. When in fact you understand that life arose because it could. And it looks like the environment is designed for life, but life in fact evolved to fit the environment in which it could fit. But somehow in a cosmic sense, people don't so the same arguments are coming up. The universe is fine-tuned for life, when you realize, well, no, it's we arose in our universe because we could. So it gave me a chance to talk about that. And then of course consciousness gave me a chance to talk about some reflections on AI that I think are, well, different than what people often hear in the horror stories and nightmare scenarios that people are developing. Anyway, that's my little sort of brief overview.
That's good. Have you tried have you played about with ChatGPT 4 yet? You had a go?
I played it about, and I wrote a piece because I was so disappointed early on, and I'm sure it's evolved, but in fact I know it is, and people have told me what they use it for, and has a lot of great uses. But I was worried that it was becoming kind of woke when I asked it certain questions, and that's inevitable, I guess, that the biases of the programmers come in. But but it's evolving, and it's particularly useful. A friend of mine says he uses it a lot for having it write code for him, and that's probably a great thing for it to do. And so I think it's fascinating, and we'll see what happens. But I did sign into that big long letter about holding off, but mostly because I was worried about this issue of of biases in the current incarnation, not so much about the end of life and the world in next year, because ChatGPT might be able to beat humans at something. Anyway, but I did sign on to it because we have to be careful. But I just it's going to change the world, and there's no stopping it. It's going to change the world, and but so did the smartphones, so did computers, so did fire, as I said before, so did so many other things. And it'll just change what it means to be human. But that's not always a bad thing. The future doesn't have to be the Terminator.
No, not at all. I mean, it's interesting because if you look at it already, it's like the like an octopus, you know, that it's extending into all aspects of life, and unbaking that is going to be very difficult anyway. Now
Yeah,
that it's out the box, so it's going to be interesting to
yeah,
see where that goes. So I guess penultimately, really, given the topics you covered in the book, as we've
yeah.
discussed, is there anything there that you think, because it's relating to the pandemic and to climate change, the big sort of meta issues, the existential crises everyone's
Yeah.
talking about? How, I mean, I think we probably share a similar view about how science did during the pandemic, etc. But how do you feel the impact could be of science on these big issues? And what can we do? Because I'm
Well,
unsure, Lawrence, if it's doing as good a job as it could at the moment.
well, yeah. Well, I think we're not doing a good job communicating it.
Yeah, that's
But
what I
I'll
meant.
tell you,
Yeah,
look,
yeah,
well, I mean, that's why when the pandemic began, by the way, I actually everything I was doing was canceled, and so
yeah,
I wrote the book, The Physics of Climate Change.
yeah.
My books normally take me between 1 and 2 years, some of them 3.
Mm-hmm.
That I wrote in 12 weeks because I had nothing apt to do. And
Yeah.
I think there is a fact where, you know, instead of focusing on the social issues and you know, telling people what they should be doing,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just show how the science, what the base of the science was, and in a way that anyone can understand. To see, it's really fundamental science. There's nothing fancy about it, and
No.
it's like science, like any other science, so people can understand that, and then you can decide how to do policy. But let's first, before turning off and not wanting to hear the science because you don't like what the people are
Yeah.
going to tell you to do, let's just hear the science, and then and then you can decide if you don't want to do anything. That's fine,
Mm-hmm.
but you at least. So that was my own little
How
contribution,
do you
and
feel about that? I mean, there's a phrase everywhere now: follow the science.
yeah, but everyone says it, but they don't do it.
They don't do
And,
it,
and
do they?
and but the
Yeah.
real problem with the pandemic was it should have been an opportunity, as a friend of mine likes to say, a crisis-opportunity. What comes from The Simpsons,
Yeah.
um, because it was an opportunity to show how science really works. The
Yeah.
problem is people are so used to hearing science as if it's a done deal
Certainty.
and saying and okay, but when it came to the pandemic, there were so many unknowns.
Hmm.
There were so many things, and science couldn't say how, you know, what would happen because we didn't know about the virus, and it's amazing in 2 years how much we learned. It's a testament to how science works. But even the efficacy of vaccines and various other treatments, when people would say, oh, this works, this doesn't work, we don't know.
We don't
Once
know.
again, we don't know. And it should have been an example to show people of how science learns, that we don't know, and then we do tests and we do experiments and we learn. And sure, we can't solve the problem right away, but by the end we have a pretty science that saved a lot of lives. So
Absolutely.
it was a missed opportunity, I think. Instead people would say, you know, follow the science when they really didn't know what the science was. And I was disappointed in some of the scientific figures, in particular
Me too. Me
Anthony
too.
Fauci in the U.S. Working for that idiot that he worked
Yeah.
for, and
Yeah.
and
Unbelievable.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got very upset by it. And in fact, I ended up losing a couple of friends because of it, because it got quite difficult to deal with because
yeah.
they weren't open-minded or able to
Well,
understand
or
the.
even the origins. I had a great podcast with Matt. Oh, what's his name now? My British scientist, writer, and Lord. He wrote a great book about arguing it with a really objective way, but making it strongly suggestive that the virus potentially arose from a leak in
Hmm,
Wuhan, and you know, you couldn't talk about that for a while. But you
no,
know, it should have been. Those are the kind of thing. Everything should be open to question, and it was
absolutely.
sort of sad when people view it as as a political issue, or you're not allowed to say it because it might reflect badly on our political relations with China or something.
Yeah, nonsense.
And yeah, that was boy,
Yeah.
what's Matt's name? I feel really bad now. But anyway, he's a
It's
well-known
okay.
scientist.
I'll put it over as an
He's written
image.
about genetics and all sorts of other things. But
Don't
anyway,
worry. I actually can hear it in my ears right now, but I can't remember his name either.
yeah,
So
yeah, I know. Yeah.
yeah. Can I, for the last few minutes, just be slightly self-indulgent? I want some advice off of you.
Okay, sure.
I think I said in one of our emails that I'm writing a book with my friend Ewan just now. I mean, I've written a book before,
Uh-huh.
but so I'm familiar with the process, if you like. But it's a science fiction book, Lawrence.
It's a science fiction, you say?
It's science fiction, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's an anthology of stories about basically what I've done. I mentioned him earlier, I've taken E.O. Wilson's idea of half Earth and I'm calling it the Half Chronicles, and it's all about maybe the year 3200, looking back on what's happened, because in Half Earth, Edward suggested that we should give over half of the Earth to nature and have the other half of Earth to human beings. And I'm trying to explore things like, nanofabrication and all these things that are buzz things at the moment. I don't want to end up like a nonsense science fiction writer. I mean, I know a lot of it is nonsense because you try your best and you can't get it right, and I don't believe in prediction anyway. What advice would you give to a virgin science fiction writer as a scientist?
Everyone asks me about science fiction, especially after the physics of Star Trek. I appeared on shows with a lot of science fiction writers and learned a lot over those years. The thing I would say, the advice that science fiction writers have given me, is that the science is not a key part of science fiction. It's a story. If you have a good story, then it's okay if you're required to suspend disbelief. You don't want to go so far away from the science that it becomes ridiculous. And there are a few science fiction stories like Interstellar that did that for me. It was just so stupid. But as long as you make it plausible and build on what we know and make it plausible and embedded in a compelling story, that's what really matters. It's the fiction that's the most important part about science fiction. The science allows you to take the story places you might not otherwise do by imagining. And as Stephen Hawking said in the foreword of my book, The Physics of Star Trek, it inspires, both science and science fiction inspire the human imagination, and that's great. Science, I think, does it better than science fiction, and so using it as a springboard to get people to think and don't abuse the existing science too much, and then write a good story. That's my advice too.
Lawrence, if people want to read, I've got a little kicker here with your website address. Is there anybody else that you would like people to follow or have a look at your work? Or?
Well, I guess there's lawrencemkrauss.com. There's our Substack site, which I write in, which is I think it's Lawrence Krauss.substack.com, and there we have if you subscribe, you can see our podcast without ads, but also it's a lot of the writing that I do and ideas I have there. And so those are two things. And then of course the Origins Project Foundation, which I run. So originsproject.org, which has our podcasts on it and our trips that we do and our lectures and other things. So I certainly encourage people to go to those three places.
I noticed this morning that one of your lectures in the UK has just been released, that you did recently about your...
Yeah, it's an event I did in London with the Origins Foundation. Did it along with, actually in combination with Atheist UK, but it was called Changing Minds and Changing Times, and I wanted to focus not on atheism, but just this is science. And so it was a chance for me. The first time I talked about the new book, and there were a number of other scientists, and then they given a prize to an award to Richard Dawkins, and he and I got to sit down again, which we've done many times.
Lovely.
And it was lovely again. It was a great chance. So we've released the video of my lecture, which was a short lecture, and shorter than I would give if I were doing the whole thing. And then there will be a video coming up that we'll release at some time of my dialogue with Richard.
Fantastic.
That'll come up.
Lawrence, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you. I feel really lucky to have done it. So thank you, sir. I really do appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks. It was a pleasure. I hope we covered some of the things you wanted. It was a fun conversation. I'm happy to have done it, and I'm glad it went where it did. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, good luck with things, and of course let me know when it appears, and I'll try and promote it.
Fine. It'll be in the next week or so. We should get it done quite quickly. I normally just give it a little edit and then get it out to the world. So
okay.
Thanks ever so much.
Okay, you take care.
Bye-bye.
And of course, I could listen to the Scottish accent forever. So
well, you can listen. I hope you understood it, Lawrence.
Yeah. No, there was one Half Earth. I have to say, it took me a while, but anyway. Okay.
Did it? Oh dear. Yeah, okay. See, I've coped reasonably well with your accent as well. So
okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not always easy, but I've managed.
Yeah, but exactly. And I also speak fast. Okay, take care.
All the best. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.